Is now not just who is the most credible to carry out mass deportations of illegal immigrants and uphold the law and move criminal foreign nationals from our country, but it's also how do we encourage lots of people who have not joined our national tribe, who have not fostered good relationships with us, who will not reproduce our civilization. How do we encourage those people to leave our country, go back to their own countries, hopefully build those up, we can check on in them in a few hundred years, but leave us in peace and prosperity. Thank you very much.
Is Islam compatible with Britain?
Well, 53% of the British public, according to a recent poll published in The Telegraph, do not seem to think so. When asked, is Islam compatible with British values, I would prefer to use the term traditions, because that's a living thing, they said no, and that's been quite the taboo for our politicians to talk about for many decades across all parties, but I think ever since Elon Musk amplified the Pakistani grooming gang story to a global scale and then made it an unavoidable issue for Labour, people have started to realise that there are hostile communities in our country who do not think the same way as we do. They do not have the same individualistic ethic that is born out of Britain's common law tradition, its Christian faith, and its nuclearised family structure. And we've had this going back to the Middle Ages, where the average age of marriage was, in its 20s, where in other parts of the world it was still common for older men to marry children, for siblings to marry one another, to cousins to marry one another, and that still persists in the world today. There's been great work by an Oxford scholar called Patrick Nash looking into the case for banning cousin marriage, and he notes that in parts of the Islamic world, cousin marriage is still between 40 and 80%, and it's still quite high in the Pakistani Biradiri clans that populate various towns and cities like Bradford, Luton, Blackburn, across the UK. And so what this means is a clannish mentality, a us versus them mentality, is entrenched by family structure and by faith. And I say faith because Islam mapped onto the existing clannish structures of 7th century Arabia and created a kind of super clan, an ummah, which united all of these families under one banner, one Muslim race. And so it extended the remit of moral consideration beyond just the family, beyond just the clan, but to fellow Muslims. But unfortunately, not to other faiths. There are multiple verses in the Quran and Hadith where Muhammad says that you should not make common cause or friends with Jews and Christians. You should strike at the necks of unbelievers where you find them. You should subject them to a jizya, kind of protection tax, rendering them second-class citizens. That was imposed upon Jewish tribes in Medina when Muhammad made the hijrah, the migration from Mecca to Medina, found them in their own lands. They rejected him as a prophet and Messiah, and he said, right, well, we will subject these people to harsh and violent penalties for being apostates, for being enemies of Allah. And so if this mentality that you can't make friends with people outside your family, your clan, your faith and your ummah persists in these areas in Britain, as documented by Muslims themselves, like Ed Hussein in the book Among the Mosques, then it's hard to say that we can have the same civilization if we keep inputting this mentality, this theory of mind, this faith into our country, and the demographic grows where now Muhammad is the most common baby name for newborns in Britain. I think it means that we're going to have a deeply culturally unrecognisable nation if this trend continues.
What I'm trying to say is there's lots of moderate Muslims who people would say, look, they don't believe this stuff that you're talking about. They are, basically integrated into British society, and they don't view us as all evil infidels. They want to slit our throats or something.
So Ed Hussein holds this opinion, himself a second-generation immigrant and Muslim, but he estimates as a former jihadist that about 3% of the global population themselves are jihadists. He used Khalifists, the people that want to see the reconstruction of the caliphate. Given the Muslim population, that's still 50 million people worldwide, and we're currently importing lots of them from the third world, from the Muslim world, and not exactly screening them for their views at the border. So we are undoubtedly importing and home-growing jihadists. I would say we don't want to risk our entire civilization on hoping that they are the moderate mystic sect, the much smaller sect of Islam, than their Sunni or Shia or Salafist counterparts, and hope that they just don't read their own texts too closely. People might hear Sunni, Shia, Khalifist, Salafist rather. Salafists are the counterpart to the Sufis. This means that they want to live as closely and authentically a life akin to the Prophet Muhammad from the 7th century. So they wage a war on what they call fitna, and this is a word meaning temptation, occasions to sin. So everything from going on social media and in mixed-sex spaces to pornography, alcohol, shaking hands with women. All of these things are to be crusaded against, to commit jihad against. And jihad, if you look at the root word in the Quran, is most associated with either violence, so fighting, or militias, fighters, the mushahideen. That's where it crops up most commonly. So there should be a jihad against all temptations to sin, which actually means that lots of British-born Western Muslims who live in segregated enclaves see the Western society around them, and this can be a further cause of radicalization. This is what Ayaan Hirsi Ali in her book Heretic calls cocooning, and the only way to, if they have been westernized and they revert back to the faith, the only way to absolve themselves of sin is something like a jihadist attack, a suicide bombing. It's not like in the Christian tradition where you have things like confession or forgiveness. It's more that you need to demonstrate your submission to the faith, and this is why caliphate, the belief in the caliphate coming, is so prominent among even second-generation British-born Muslims. We saw the Henry Jackson Society polling, which is very pessimistic, because it says 52% want to ban depictions of the Prophet Muhammad, a third want Sharia law and Islam to become the dominant religion in the UK, and up to three-quarters of them believe that Hamas did nothing wrong on October 7th when they committed those heinous crimes, those genocidal acts against Jews, and that's most common among 18 to 30 aged, university-educated, British-born Muslims, which means we've got a cross-generational radicalization problem. And the Muslim community elders themselves are helping with this. We've had Dr. Taj Hargey speak to Martin Daubney on GB News about how mosques and madrasas are preaching to Muslim men to see white women and girls as second-class citizens.